You know about Yeah, we know about football here in Ohio too.
I was about to say, I've got a lot of friends, a lot of neighbors actually around here in Nashville that are big. There seems to be a big Ohio State presence here, so I
Yeah,
know how
I
big
bet there
football is
is.
there.
Yeah.
But no, Eric, good to have you on the pod today. Like we were talking about before I pushed record, I know this is something we've been in communication about for almost 2 months now. As you reached out to share your book with me, and I'm excited to talk about it because you've done a lot of cool things in your life. You're a part of a lot of cool things, and really just wanted to kick things off with you just kind of describing your story a little bit from just how you grew up and the progression of the things that you're involved in now, and really that's what your book's about. So I'd love for you just to dive in and talk a little bit about your story.
Well, first of all, Chris, I want to thank you for the invitation. What you're doing with Books for Guys is so cool, and it fills a needed need in the marketplace. So I want to thank you for all your effort, and I know these things are not easy on your side, so I very much appreciate that. My book's Stories at the Center is really a series of stories that I've weaved into a memoir. And it's about growing up with a disabled father. My father was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 3 days after I was born. My mother, back in the 60s, had to take on the role that, she wasn't even allowed to have a credit card in her name, but she had to take on, a lot of the male roles. And she became the assistant dean of the College of Dentistry. So she made it when everything was against her. And from there, it talks about my evolution as an artist and as a songwriter. There's one of the goals that I did not reach, and I'm a very goal oriented person. I like to reach my goals. I had a goal as a runner, and that was cut short by a coach who, and I don't like to blame other people for, things that I don't accomplish. But as I look back, he was just the wrong coach for me in all the wrong ways. And that kind of that was one goal that I didn't reach that I've always felt bad about. But I learned from that, and then it goes through my high school musical career, and I've had kind of a strange career in that I'm a songwriter and a speaker. Never really fit into the music world. I never really fit into the speaking world, so I've always kind of been on my own, and talk about how that process evolved into starting a TV show on PBS called Songs at the Center. And so, that's a chapter or so is about that. And I'll never forget. Um, and when you come upon a project, you can never really look at the one thing that led you to it. But one of the things that I'll never forget is I was down in Nashville, and I was meeting with a composer and just trying to find my way. And he said, "What do you want to do?" And out of nowhere, I don't know where it came from, I said, "I think I can see myself on PBS." And he looked at me and said, "Don't ever forget that." 10 years later, I had a show on PBS. And so that was, and I haven't seen him since, haven't talked to him or anything, but it's moments like that that make a life and make circumstances. So that's really what it's about. And then the book ends with kind of some conclusions I've made. I think it talks about, I look at my own life and the processes and the lessons that I've learned. And then it ends with, going back to when my father died. And I want to say something strange about that. When I started writing the memoir, and I never started saying, "Hey, I'm going to write a memoir," but I took a class back in the early early 2000s, and we had to write an essay about our past. And what I wrote for my very first essay turned out to be the last chapter in this
Mm,
book. And that's just kind of a cool creative thing that us writers will find neat.
yeah. No, and I'm glad you went in through all that, Eric, because I was wanting to say like what you've done is very unique and had your hand in a lot of different things. And before there's a couple things I want to dive into, but I was going back to you mentioned those small moments that build your story over time, and when you look back and when you're right, everyone should, I think, write a memoir because everyone has a very unique path and story, and there's always so
Right.
many lessons that people can write about, people can learn from. So I just think no matter some people they think like, who am I to write a memoir? I'm like, well, you're a person, you have your own experiences, and I think everyone should take the opportunity to do that. And so, but isn't it cool all those little bitty moments, like you saying you were gonna be on PBS and then kind of speaking that into existence. But again, never seeing that guy again, but realizing how important that little moment was. Those fascinate me as I people can't undermine the importance of those little things that lead to the big things that you accomplish.
Absolutely, and that was one of the surprises I had when I wrote this book. I mean, I've got lifelong friends who've I've shared secrets with and had experiences with and all that, but yet those were not always, as I look back at my life, those were not always the most life-changing instances. They were life-changing for me, those people were, but the instances often come out of nowhere, and the important things are often done by anonymous people. And so we always have to be aware in our life because we never know when one of those is going to happen.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, I want to chip away just a little bit at your story, Eric, and not give too much away,
Yeah.
as I want people to read your book and really deep dive into it. But one of my questions for you, and it may be, I don't want to get too deep or too sensitive with it, but I've never experienced some of the trials you did with having a disabled parent and your mom, having to really step up and be the strong one. And it sounds like, she's still going strong today, which is amazing. And so, but what was that, I guess, your personal experience like as a kid, kind of understanding what was going on with your dad and mom, and talk just a little bit about how that shaped, I don't know, the way you thought, and how maybe it was different than what your friends, were experiencing. And so what was, I don't know, were there some challenges with that?
There were many challenges. However, when I was going through it, I just thought that that was a normal life. I mean, when you're a kid, you don't have much perspective and you just think whatever's happening in your house is normal. It wasn't really until I approached 30 that I understood that my life was so much different than other people's. And now that I'm fully grown and mature, a lot of my friends are going through what I went through in my teens. Parents are getting sick and have to go into homes and stuff like this. I don't My dad he was really a tragic case because he was so intelligent and so funny, but he was just disabled. He was not able to get around, and, I'm ashamed to say it, but I in my book, I talk about, being ashamed of my dad because when you're a kid, you think of strength as physical and, big towering dads, and my dad wasn't that at all. And when I was, in my 20s, or 30s, I was asked to write a, theme song for an MS, puppet show that they were doing. And so I did a little research, and they gave me some books on this and all that, and I was shocked to find that most boys were ashamed of their dads. There was an element of shame in that. I feel terrible about that, but I understand where it comes from. So there was that aspect, but there was also the aspect that I learned that as long as somebody is loved and they have a mind and a heart and a spirit, they bring value to this world. And we need to listen to them, and I think that's where my sense of wanting to serve others comes from, is seeing that my dad, just go through that. I mean, he was a lucky man because, my mom was competent and we weren't dirt poor. We were poor, but not dirt poor. But, he just could not do what other fathers do. And I think it really hurt him. And I see now, as I'm a father, I see the full extent of that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and again, I was just it's something a lot of people don't experience, but I'm glad you described it the way you did. And in a total separate conversation, it is unique, the relationship between father and son, and as you get older, what that looks like from a not a lack of respect, but as a young man, you're taking on your world and you think, you may know better. And so it's just it's a very interesting dynamic that's probably another subject to study at some point and read about and kind of better understand
Yeah.
those thoughts. But I'm glad you brought it up because I've heard that dynamic discussed before, but I've never really deep dived into it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he ultimately was a gift to me, and my career path has been my own, and I think that he kinda set the stage for that.
No, that's amazing. Well, talk a little bit about transition over to music. What inspired you? And I guess what was kind of that moment at an early age where you were like, hey, this is something I love to do? Some people they gravitate towards sports, they gravitate
Right.
towards singing and music, or they have that hobby that just grabs them and that's their passion.
Right.
What was that moment for you? And you talk about your music a little bit.
Well, I was a I always loved music, I from the time I was a kid, we had music class every day in school, and so I loved to sing. Never, ever forget when the Beatles came on Ed Sullivan, and, I started following all the British rock bands, and I wanted to be a drummer, so I started out as a drummer. And it's strange, but when I was 15, I was working in, um, a family grocery store, and that, thing that, caravan, whatever it's called, was going across, that carries all the food across so they can check it out. And I was just standing there talking, and this music's playing, and all of a sudden, I put my hands down on that thing as it's passing, like I'm playing the piano. And I thought, where did that come from? Well, within a couple years from that, I basically taught myself all the chords, and I'm still not a very great piano player, but I play it well enough to write, and that's kind of where I discovered that passion. And then, Jackson Brown, Jim Croce, Joni Mitchell, the Eagles, Janis Ian. I mean, it was the era of the singer-songwriter. And I just learned so much by listening to all those people. And then, to find out one day that I'm going to interview them was just mind blowing.
Yeah, and I'm curious on just your path to PBS
Yeah.
and why that was such a and you kinda said, like, you're not really sure why you spouted out what you said, but you obviously, had some fascination and knew a little bit about what you wanted to do, but I don't know, what's the story behind wanting to be on there and producing and getting that show started, and and obviously it mixes with your music, so how did that all come about?
Well, in about 2010, 2012, an arts center opened in my town called the McConnell Arts Center, and then a club opened called Natalie's. And they and I at the McConnell Center, I got some friends together. We did a monthly song writer circle there. No audience. We just get together and sing. And then at Natalie's, I went up to the owner right after it opened, and I said, I've been playing a lot in Nashville. I played the Bluebird, almost 40 times. And so I had some experience seeing what was going on down there. And I said, they do this thing called a songwriter round. They get 3 or 4 songwriters together. And I said, I'd like to try it here in Columbus. It had never been done. And so I did that for a number of years, but what I discovered 2 important things about that. One, it was a real surprise to me because up to that time, I'd just been promoting myself as a singer-songwriter and as a speaker and all that, but I discovered how much joy I got from watching other people exposing other artists to the public. And then the second thing is to see the public respond, and I was just amazed because it brought in a whole new element to my career. It wasn't just about Eric anymore. It was about showcasing other people. And I don't know, within about 3 or 4 months of doing that, I thought, well, maybe I can do a radio show or something. But I just had this idea that turned into doing a TV show. So I went to the McConnell Center, which is a mile from my house, and I talked to them, and they were really interested in doing a pilot. So we did a pilot. We got it on the NBC affiliate here for 5 or 6 weeks. And then PBS happened to see it, the local PBS station. They wanted it. They put it on the air. And about 2 or 3 weeks into that, the program director, Stacia Hent, says to me, I think this has national potential. Do you mind if I send it to a syndicator? I'm like, mind? I don't care. I don't even know about that. And since then, we've been on, cumulatively, we've been on about 420 stations. So, it just it's one of those things that, you can't plan ahead. You just kind of one step at a time. And sometimes things work out.
Yeah. Oh man, that's incredible. And I love that too because we were talking about moments earlier, but I don't know, just taking advantage of those organic opportunities that just present themselves, and when they're there, it's you jump in and you do it, and then you look back, and several years later, you're like, wow, look what we've done, and so I'm sure you still pinch yourself thinking, wow, look what we created.
Well, I don't pinch myself yet because I have enough anxiety. I have to, be
Yeah,
working all the time. But I think when it's over, whenever that'll be, I'll probably find some satisfaction in it. But I do find satisfaction in it now. I love, all the songwriters. I love talking to them. The day that we're shooting, I'm just very excited because I want to see what they're going to bring to the show, and to give them the opportunities to shine. And I always learn so much from interviewing them too.
yeah, yeah.
And
Well,
I've
I've
made
got
a
to
few
go.
friends.
Yeah, oh, I'm sure a lot. I've gotta go back to something you said though, because you kinda threw it in there on me, and I didn't know this about you, but you said you've played at the Bluebird
Yeah,
40 plus times probably?
yeah, probably. Yeah,
Yeah, that's incredible because
yeah,
I know how important that place is to Nashville, and it's a
yeah.
big deal when people are able to actually get in there and see somebody perform. What I'm curious to know how you get invited to perform at the Bluebird. Like, just what's the
Well,
process like? And because I've never been personally. I've only had the opportunity once and couldn't make it. But I know people stand in line, when certain artists show up. But I know
yeah,
it's such an intimate setting and such an honorable place to be able to perform. So I'm just curious your experience there and how you've gotten to do all of that.
yeah. Well, it depends. Some people, get invited by other people who've been invited and they get on. In my case, I auditioned and I'll never forget this. Went down to Nashville. It was like the last week of, I want to say 2003, maybe. And a friend took me down there and he goes, you want to go to the Bluebird tonight? And I'm like, it makes me nervous. I don't even want to get near that place. And as I was walking out, I saw a little sign. This was back before, computers took over the world. And there was a little sign by the door that says, want to play the Bluebird? It gave me an audition date. And I thought, oh, why did I see that? Because I knew myself well enough to know that I couldn't pass it up. So I auditioned and and got in. I think they said that Amy Kurland hosted the auditions and she still owned it then. It's now owned by the Nashville Songwriters Association International. But Amy said that about 15 to 20% would be invited to play. And so I got a letter, not an email back then, telling me that I had made it. So I was very, very thrilled.
Yeah. When's the last
So
time you
that's how I
played
got.
there?
It's been a couple years. I haven't gone down there recently. I've just been too busy with the show. But it's such a special place because there are. I remember not long ago I had a discussion with an agent. He's a publisher actually, and he said that that was his church, that he'd go to the Bluebird and he'd listen. And truly, I mean, if you want to hear great songwriting and songs that can change your life, the greatest songwriters in the world play there. In fact, there's a sign above the entrance that says that the greatest songwriters in the world pass through these doors. And, if we had more time, I could give you a couple examples of songs that have just, blown me away by the artists. And I'll give you one. Don Schlitz, who wrote The Gambler, at age 23, he was singing a song, and this was maybe 15, 20 years ago now, but he was doing this thing called Don for a Dollar, and he sang a line. He just written a song with Gary Burr, and it was, "My heart may be broken, but my memory's doing fine." And I heard that line, and 10 years later, when I finally met Don, I remembered that line, and I told him, I said, "That's what makes a great song, is being able to remember something from the song, whether it's a line or a hook or something, the next day." And I told him that line, and he looks at me and goes, "Are you sure I wrote that song?" And I'm thinking, my God, you've written so many great songs, you don't even remember that one. But he dug it out, and it's just, there were so many moments like that at the Bluebird. It's a
Yeah.
great place. Yeah,
Yeah. No, that's incredible. Well, if you ever play there again, you'll have to let me know, and we'll come down and watch you.
I sure will. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Eric, just a couple more questions for you. I'd really like to know, just specifically from your book, as people read it, what are a couple things that you hope people take away from it? Whether that be simply enjoyment, a lesson you hope somebody learns from it, but what would you like people to take away from your book?
Well, I don't know. I think that, as artists, we write things and people get all kinds of things that we never even intended. But my wish is that, first of all, people enjoy it. They see their own lives and part of it. But if there's a lesson, I just hope that this book speaks to the need to readjust our values a little bit in this world. It's not about money. It's not about fame. It's not about success in so many ways that we define it. My dad, using him as an example again, he led a very successful life, but nobody outside of his four walls knew that. And I think that, this book, I hope anyway, that this book can bring empathy and a need for people to look at their own lives and be grateful for their own resources, and reach into them and say, "Wait a minute, I don't have this fame or this money or whatever, but if I look inside, I see something that's even more valuable. And if I can help people see that, that'll make me happy."
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they will. Again, I think it's so important to write these stories, and yours, I'm glad you've shared it for people to
Thank
read
you.
and learn about you. And so, but Eric, I got one more question for you, and it's a tough
Okay. All
one. I
right.
love asking people this question when I see a bookshelf behind them full of books, because I know it's going to be a tough one, and I know it's your answer could change based off the season of life and or anything like that. But what's a book or two that has meant a lot to you personally, and what's a good book recommendation that you like to give to others?
Well, first of all, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Good.
The first half of that book, I mean, this man was in a concentration camp. He knows the secret to life, and I found a lot of good advice in that. Siddhartha is another one. I learned about what it means to watch the river. That's what Hermann Hesse says in there, watch the river. And another one would be The Alchemist. It's a fable, but that one really spoke to me. So, just off the top of my head, those are three books that I would recommend. And there's so many others, but I think the classics just have so much to offer us. And I know it can be a hassle to read them because they're not written in our time frame, and maybe they take a little bit more time to write or to read. I'm a big love of the classics too.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned The Alchemist. I was Joel Goldberg, who's the sideline reporter for the Kansas City Royals. He was on the
Yeah,
podcast recently, and I was just on his last week, rounding the bases, and he's deep diving into that book for the first time and going through, and he was
yeah.
talking about just how entrenched he was and just, this time around being intentional with reading it and taking things from it. So it's funny you're the second person to mention that in the last week to me. So everyone listening need to pick up that book.
That's right.
Yeah. No, well, Eric, we've got your book on the website. We're so proud to spotlight it and share your story. And like you said, you've got so much work you're doing and so many things to accomplish ahead of you. And so now thank you for being a part of the Books for Guys story now and your support. and we can't wait to support you in all the things that you are working on and the things you'll continue to accomplish in the future. So, man, we appreciate it and so excited to have you a part of this with us.
Oh, my pleasure, Chris. And I wish you the very best, and I will do what I can to support you and your efforts.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.
All right.